proper minutes to be kept and stored of very critical steps in the security process, namely the evaluation of information, the gathering of information, of course, the evaluation of it, plans, and action. That really straddles the essence of what it is that you as a security manager need to do, isn't that correct?
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
So that should all be properly recorded, and for instance, if you, your colleagues, or management need to know what has been, what the information is, what the plans are, what the action is to be or has been, that will be clearly, unequivocally recorded in such a minute.
That is correct.
Now, generally speaking, Mr. Blow, this is something that I want you to comment on, if you would. When one looks at the log and the recording of the briefing and debriefing sessions that we find there, it's not always clear that amounts to a proper minute of plans, or what the information was, or how it was evaluated. Are you able to comment on that at all? And coupled with that request is whether there are indeed minutes, fuller minutes, that are stored somewhere else that relate to sessions of this kind.
Mr. Chair, indeed, all briefings that were held at security, as the procedure quite correctly states, needed to be kept in a manner that is detailed and as explained above there. My recollection of all briefings held is that we kept our logs up to date, and that briefings that we needed to do were done. Also, Mr. Chairman, you referred to the fact that it must be a detailed briefing. As far as I know, all such briefings would have been detailed and were detailed. However, I do note that in the log sheet kept, there appears to be discrepancies, and quite honestly, I'm noting them. However, I can only surmise that either we did not capture them as one reason, perhaps. Perhaps another reason would be that because of events that were developing at the time, as well as the pace at which we were going at the time, there would have been an omission. But I am honestly noting what I would refer to as discrepancies, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Blow. We'll examine some of those shortly. But what I do want to underline, just to ensure that I understood correctly, other than what we see in the log, there are no other minutes recording what plans were decided upon over that period.
Mr. Chairman, other than what we see, there are other records, such as, for example, plans, surface plans that we displayed at notice boards. We would plot in there where our hotspots are, and that you wouldn't be able to capture in the log sheet. I also thinking of whiteboards where you would write information which also serves as records. I'm thinking specifically here also of bus routes that would have been decided upon because of a hotspot. Those records, you can't put them in a log sheet. So by those, I'm referring to those are the records I can think of right at the moment.
Yes, I appreciate what you're saying there. But once you have looked, for instance, at surface plans or the tabulation of certain issues on a whiteboard, there would result from that a decision as to the deployment of security personnel to any particular area and for a particular purpose.
That is correct, Mr. Chair.
And that sort of decision should certainly then find its way into the record of the meeting.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. All right. Thank you. Well, again, you'll have the opportunity, as I've said, Mr. Blow, when we look at one or two of these entries, to explain them. Then, if we can carry on with paragraph 4.4.4 of this document, which reads as follows: deployed members must be briefed on the latest situation when reporting on duty and debriefed when reporting off duty. You note that?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And that again, Mr. Blow, to me appears to be an essential prescription and serving the obviously important purpose that when security members are deployed, they're put into the field, they must be briefed fully with what the latest facts are concerning the situation and security issues, correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And likewise, that when they come off duty, they are debriefed so that they can immediately relay to persons such as yourself in security management what the experiences have been, what their observations have been, and what their perceptions may be in respect of the future development of security and threats.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
So, very important. Correct?
Very important, critical.
Yes. Then, if we could look at 4.4.6, briefing sessions must be precise and clear in order for the management team as well as the deployed teams to fully understand what is expected of them in performing their individual duties, and really that echoes specifically what we have just discussed.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Then the next chapter there is 4.5 planning sessions. I want to touch on some of these paragraphs. Also, 4.5.1, the manager, mining security, will decide, depending on the situation, which parties to involve in the planning session of the operation.
Yes, noted.
This is an aspect of your broad discretion, is it not, in terms of what is required to deal with an individual situation that arises or threatens to arise?
That is correct.
Then 4.5.3, planning must be done precisely in order not to confuse the deployed teams of what functions are expected of them.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Self-explanatory and also critically important.
Yes.
4.5.4, important shortfalls, risks and events must be identified, recorded and managed.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And would I be correct, Mr. Blow, in understanding that shortfalls, for instance, may or might typically include shortfalls in the security deployments, the security plans, that sort of thing?
Coupled also with any shortcomings identified, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. So it might be, it might encompass things like the following. Shortfalls in the gathering of information, the processing of information, decisions about deployments, equipment to be used in deployments, the number of deployments, the place of deployment, all those sorts of factors.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Yes. And risks, likewise, very important feature of the planning session, so that as a particular risk becomes apparent, and risks, I think, almost inevitably are potential events, aren't they?
Yes.
That they are identified and addressed.
Correct.
Then the last chapter here, 4.6, debriefing sessions. I'll just read again all those paragraphs on for the record. 4.6.1, after any incident, a debriefing session will be held between all relevant role players. Again, self-evident, and Mr. Blow, that would include presumably the security personnel who had been deployed and involved in the incident,
Yes,
whatever
Mr.
it
Chair.
may have been,
Yes, Mr. Chair.
and for the reasons that we discussed a few minutes ago.
Yes.
4.6.2, debriefing sessions will be held in order to establish any shortcomings or misses in the planned process.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And I think that's it's a kind of shortfall situation. But if, for instance, an event happens that had not been foreseen, would that be categorized potentially as a miss in the process?
Can you just elaborate
Yes,
more, Mr. Chair?
let me put that in a somewhat better way, Mr. Blow. When there is security planning and the management of potential risks, then an important part of that presumably is to consider all possible, realistically possible scenarios. I'll use that word because it comes up from time to time.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
What may happen?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And if indeed there is an incident and a particular aspect of that incident or the whole of it had not been foreseen, that might be thought of as being a miss in the planned process. Would that be right?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Yes. Then 4.6.3, the debriefing session must be recorded and all documentation must be securely stored. That again is an important requirement. And perhaps I need to ask you again, where we come across, as we do several times in the log, that debrief sessions are held, would there be places other than in the log where a debriefing session is recorded, the details of it, or do we find what there is in the log and only in the log?
Mr. Chairman, some debriefings are done and not logged. So I believe the only place where debriefing records should be found should be the log.
Why are some debriefing sessions not recorded, minuted?
It is, Mr. Chairperson, when, let's explain with examples. For example, if on that day there has been no serious incident, we deployed and all members had been to their places, and now they're about to knock off, and then in that instance, we're going to be talking on events of the day and not necessarily log records of that conversation because there's nothing to action on that.
That's not a compliance with paragraph 4.6.3 though. This refers to incidents, and when you have an incident you have to have a debriefing session. You must do it to establish shortcomings or misses, and it must be recorded. Now, why do you depart from that in some cases?
Mr. Chairman, as I said earlier, if there has been no incident during managing that strike event, then we deem it necessary sometimes not to have a record of it.
No, I understand that. You see, 4.6.1 begins with the words, after any incident. So clearly, a debriefing session is only required where there has been an incident. Absent an incident, no debriefing session. But the question is, if there has been an incident, are there cases where debriefing sessions are not held? That's the first question. I'll give you the second one at the same time that I want to hear your answer on. You can have, it seems to me, you could have three situations. You have an incident where there's a debriefing session and it's recorded. and the documentation secured. That's the first instance. The second case you could have is there's an incident where there was no debriefing. And the third incident is you have an incident, there was debriefing, but it wasn't recorded. So those are the three things that can happen. Am I right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman.
Right. Now, obviously, if there's no incident, there's no debriefing. But are there cases where incidents take place and there is a debriefing and it's not recorded?
Mr. Chairman, let me just first answer you on the first part, if I may, please. There's no incident, there will still be a debriefing.
But this procedure document doesn't apply. So there's no obligation to record the debriefing session.
Understand.
Clearly, the debriefing sessions have to be recorded are post-incident debriefings.
I understand.
So that we can take off the table.
Thanks.
So you leave my three cases.
Yes.
First case, incident debriefing recorded. Second case, incident debriefing not recorded. Third case, incident no debriefing, no recording. Right?
Yes.
Right. Now let's take the second case. Are there cases where there's an incident, there's debriefing, and it's not recorded?
Mr. Chairman,
Yes or no?
I don't think there are.
So the answer, you think not.
Yes.
All right. Third case, are there cases where there's incident and there's no debriefing?
I know of if there's an incident, there will definitely be a debriefing.
I see. So there will be no case, let's get this clear, there will be no case where there was an incident where there was no debriefing.
Yes.
And there will also be, as far as you're aware,
Yes.
there has been no case where there was an incident where there was debriefing and it wasn't recorded. That's as far as you're aware.
Yes.
Right, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Mr. Blow, just one or two further aspects of this document that I'm going to deal with. On the following page, 18, there is the important topic of the setup of a joint operational command. And that we know was put in place certainly by the afternoon of the 10th of August. In fact, there had been some operational consolidation even before that on the 9th of August.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And that was an important facility.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And I want to just take you to a couple of the paragraphs under 5.2 general that underline that. 5.2.1, in the event of an incident, it is necessary to set up an organized and equipped central JOC in order to effectively manage information and strategy.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Then I'll look at 5.2.3. The JOC will centralize all communications pertaining to the specific incident.
Correct.
And 5.2.6, work in the JOC is an ongoing task, and the center commander will ensure that records, maps, and communications logs are updated continuously and accurately.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Now, all of those are, again, it seems to me, very important factors in the management in an effective way of security responsibilities.
Indeed.
And the JOC occupies a particularly important place, as is recorded here, that it is the location where all relevant information must be centralized and strategy decisions, among others, must be taken there.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Not elsewhere.
Correct.
Right. We'll also look at aspects of that in due course, Mr. Blow, but the last point I want to take you to, well, let me just say there are many provisions in the document relating to details in terms of administration and record keeping, etc. We don't have time to look at those. I think that the essence of it we have captured. Lastly, I'd like you to look at page 23, paragraph 8.1.3.
Mr. Tip, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just want to clarify something with the witness. Mr. Blow, incident would that cover anything that's out of the ordinary in any given day? The word incident, what would, in your estimate, qualify as an incident?
Mr. Chairman, to me, an incident is something that has occurred. For example, it is, let's talk about if there's a murder. That is an incident. During the event, I referred earlier to an event. During a strike event, there could be one incident that is a murder. That is how I define incident. That's how we normally know them as.
Well, that's quite serious murder. On the lowest scale, what would qualify as an incident?
Mr. Chairman, for example, let's talk about the strike as was happening during the time. There's a strike, and somebody was able to maybe to come to the jock when they are not authorized to come to the jock. That is an incident.
Threats would qualify as an incident.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Throwing stones
Correct.
would qualify.
Intimidation of any kind.
Intimidation.
Violence of any kind.
That is correct.
Action taken by Lonman staff to deal with situations like that, like firing rubber bullets and doing other things of that sort.
That is correct.
An unplanned march. An unplanned march of workers. Will that qualify as an incident?
That is correct.
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Blow.
Yes.
I'm sorry to interrupt you, Mr. Tip.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just following on that, Mr. Blowitt, it presents an important question. You've given some examples of incidents as being particular events that may be out of the ordinary, but specific and isolated.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
What my understanding is of this document in the context of the events of 10, 11 and 12 August 2012 is that under your leadership, according to this document, a JOC was set up with effect from the 9th of August. It became more fully established in the afternoon of the 10th of August.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Now that JOC was to serve an ongoing purpose, was it not,
yes,
of coordinating all information, strategic and management and deployment decisions throughout the course of the industrial action for so long as it might last.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
So it's not as though a JOC gets set up because there has been an assault and a different JOC for a different assault. This is one single central location where decision making is to be done.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
All right. Then if we've got up on the screen, Mr. Blow, managing the situation under general, I just want to look at paragraph 8.1.3. All situations must be closely monitored in order to determine the mood of the people, and I underline notionally the word mood, taking part in the industrial action in order to predict, and I underline that notion, possible influences, consequences which may lead to business interruption or disruptions, intimidation, injury to people, damage to property via sabotage, or disruption of external services.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
That's a fair assembly of possible consequences. But what is critical here, it seems to me, Mr. Blow, and I'd like your comment on this, is that the mood of the people taking part in the action is a vital tool in order for management leadership, the security leadership, to be able to predict possible influences or consequences. Correct?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And you agree with the importance of that provision?
Indeed, Mr. Chair.
Now, I'm going to use that as as a bit of a departure point or a launch pad to look at the situation that you had on the 10th of August at the LPD offices.
Before you do that, Mr. Tip, may
Yes.
I ask a question of the witness? I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think it precedes the point you're now dealing with. In 8.1.1, it said liaisons must immediately commence to establish a workable solution
Yes.
in order to address the reason for the industrial actions / community unrest situations.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Now, what exactly is meant by liaisons?
It is that the responsible people like human resources, employee relations, they must already engage with those that are starting with the community unrest or the industrial action. And the reason for that is to, where possible, avert the strike or the community unrest.
The liaisons then would involve employees of London on the one hand and possibly strikers or unions or
Community leaders.
community leaders on the other.
Yes, Mr.
That's
Chair.
right. Could it also include the police? I see the main reason for the commencement of, as it's put, of a liaison is to establish a workable solution in order to address the reason. So the purpose of a liaison is basically to find the reason, is it? And then to find a solution to the reason
Yes.
for the problem that's arising.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
And what would be the situation in an unplanned strike, something that occurs spontaneously without permission? Would that include the strikers being part of the liaison?
Commissioner, where possible, the people, if for example, your example of strikers, it would be them or their leadership. That liaison should happen with them under the security auspices. Yes.
The initiative for the liaison would be taken by your office.
Yes. If I may qualify.
Yes, please.
Because at that point in time, security are at the forefront of what's happening. So we would try and determine what is the issue, what's happening, even before we involve the SAPS and the human resources people. Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Blair.
Thank you, ma'am.
Mr. Blow, an important moment in all these developments was, of course, the march to LPD on 10th of August and the mood of the strikers at that stage. And there are observations that have been made by you in your statement, also by Mr. Sinclair in his statement. I'm going to come to them in a moment. But I want to put to you as a general proposition that in a situation of industrial action of that kind, when one thinks about mood is not an absolute, it is a relative concept, is it not?
Correct, Mr. Chair.
And it's important in order to properly assess the character of a mood of a large number of people at a time such as 10 August, to have regard to previous perspectives that need to be taken into account in order to inform a proper assessment of the mood. Would that be right?
That would be correct, 100%.
Yes. Now, I just want to run through half a dozen or so perspectives of that kind, which I intend to do very briefly. First of all, that with your quite extensive experience in different mining environments, and also, of course, in your responsibility as the manager of security, I take it that you've had a fair amount of experience of industrial action and that you also remain informed about trends in the country as a whole in respect of the character of industrial action.
Indeed, Mr. Chair.
And I think it's probably a commonplace observation that unfortunately in the course of say, the last 10 years or so, industrial action in South Africa has very often been accompanied by quite high levels of violence. Is that correct?
That's been noted, yes.
And equally important to note that a good deal of that violence is directed towards those who do not participate in the strike.
Indeed.
In other words, people who are regarded as scabs,
Yeah.
sellouts. Correct?
Yes, correct.
And that's a serious consideration, is it not, in looking at industrial action, which may be looming or may be underway.
It is a serious.
Then, closer to home, perhaps also, there were the events earlier in 2012, quite extensive in time and quite intensive in their character, at Impala, which is, of course, very close to you at Lonman.
Yes.
And I just want to put up a XX1. It is a statement by Mr. Gilichana, who's given evidence here. He was, at the time, the chief negotiator for NUM at Lonman. I don't know whether you came across him at all.
Across him, Mr. Chair, as a person?
As a person?
Yes, I have.
You have, all right.
Yes.
Let us go to paragraph 7. And Mr. Blow, I'm going to run through these paragraphs because it may be thought of as a convenient shorthand way of...
How long is this process going to take? The reason I asked the question is just before 10:30.
Yes.
I was proposing to take the first comfort break now, but so if this is going to be a short process, we can take it after you've done it. Alternatively, it might be appropriate to take it now. I'm in your hands. You're cross-examining.
Chair,
You tell me.
I have, as I said, approximately half a dozen topics. It would flow better if they're all done in one. So this would be a convenient...
Let me ask the witness one question before we go, which actually goes back a step from where you are now. You referred to the need to assess the mood of the workers.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
I take it that includes such things as a change of mood.
Correct, Mr. Chair.
Now, we know that on the Friday, the 10th,
Yes.
they came, they wanted to present demands, and we presumably going to have some evidence. We already had some evidence already about what happened.
Yes.
Now, what you say in your statement, the first one, which we referred to, which is quadruple R 1.1, what you say in page 6 of that statement, paragraph 20, is what happened when the crowd dispersed.
Yes.
And I don't think it has to be put on the screen. As the crowd was dispersing, you say, threats from various people in the crowd were uttered,
Correct.
with suggestions that this was not the end of the issue and something would happen further.
Yes, Mr. Chair.
And then you go on to say, I cannot point to any specific individuals who uttered such threats, but they were voices from the crowd with a level of verbal aggression which I had not previously experienced at the mine.
Yes, indeed.
Words to the effect that management would have to deal with the consequences and would be responsible for what was to happen were uttered.
Correct.
So there was clearly a significant change of mood,
Indeed.
which required an appropriate response from London.
Correct.
Yeah, thank you. We'll take the tea adjournment. We'll take the first comfort break adjournment now.